Hi everyone, the topic that we chose and we're going to speak about today is on psychology with police selection and stress. So we're going to start off with the OPP selection process. So the OPP selection process has 4 stages that applicants wanting to become police officers need to go through in order to determine if they're qualified enough for the job. The first stage, which is phase 1, is a pre-hiring stage of the selection process, which consists of everything applicants need to do before the process officially begins. For example, receiving the online information package with all the information needed about the process and the required mental ability assessment and personality assessment that needs to be done prior to starting. This also includes everything needed to be eligible to apply, such as being at least 18 years old, having a first aid certificate, a valid CPR certificate, and either a grade 12 education or a GED diploma. The second phase is known as the interviewing phase of the selection process, which consists of several interviews in order to determine if applicants have the competencies needed in order to be considered for the position of a police officer. This is a stage of the process that determines whether the applicant is mentally, physically qualified and knowledgeable enough for the position. The third phase is the background investigation phase, which involves an extensive and comprehensive background investigation on the applicant to determine if any previous criminal convictions, or if there is a pattern of bad habits that could be a conflict with the responsibility of being a police officer. Also, the stage involves a psychological test as well as an interview with a psychologist in order to determine the mental condition of the applicant. The final and fourth phase is the review phase, which involves reviewing all of the information collected from previous stages in the selection process in order to determine who is qualified or not for the position. In this stage, those who are determined qualified can be offered a conditional offer of employment. However, this doesn't always happen. So for the next slide, we have the assessment center. So the assessment center is an essential part of the recruitment process where candidates go through numerous assessments in order to determine if they're qualified for the position of a police officer. The assessment process is broken into 4 categories, which are 1, a competency-based interview, 2, a numerical ability test, 3, a verbal ability test, and 4, a 4 role play exercise. So first, the competency-based interview is a 20-minute interview of 4 questions. Each questions have a 5-minute maximum answer, which will be based on competencies such as serving the public, openness to change, service delivery, professionalism, decision-making, and working with others. The second part of the assessment center, the numerical ability test, which is 23 minutes with 21 questions assessing your mathematical skills and how you process numerical information such as percentages, averages, ratios, and graph interpretations. The third section is a verbal ability test, which is a 30-minute long test with 28 questions. Half the questions are situational judgment-based, and candidates will have to decide whether the outcome of the situation is true or false. The second part of the section is comprehension-based, so candidates will have to digest and comprehend information and then choose the correct statement from a multiple choice option. The final part is the 4 role plays, which will be 4 10-minute role plays, which will assess how candidates use the material they have learned while using competencies in a series of situations. So next we have KSAs. So throughout the entire selection process, applicants must demonstrate a list of competencies, which are knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required to be a police officer. These competencies are, so first, analytical thinking. The applicant must be able to analyze situations and events in a logical way and to organize parts of a problem in a systematic way. Then we have self-confidence, so the applicant must believe in their own abilities and judgments, as well as a recognition of personal limitation and development needs. Then we have communication, so the applicant needs to be able to demonstrate effective listening, verbal and written communication. This is because this job is dangerous and being able to listen and communicate with others can be life-saving. Next, we have flexibility and valuing diversity. So the applicant must be able to adapt their approach in a variety of situations and to work effectively with a wide cross-sectional of the community representing diverse backgrounds, cultures, and economic circumstances. We then have self-control, so applicants must be able to demonstrate the ability to keep their own emotions under control and to restrain negative actions when provoked or under stressful situations. Next, we have relationship building. So applicants need to be able to develop and maintain a network of contacts from both inside and outside the police service. Next, achievement orientation. So having the desire for continuous improvement in service and accomplishment. And finally, we have medical and physical skills and abilities. So the applicant must be able to demonstrate job-related medical and physical skills such as vision, hearing, motor skills, cardiovascular endurance, and upper body strength.
Instruments used in selection process: a written mental ability or aptitude test, an oral interview, a psychology test, an interview with a psychologist, a background check, vision and hearing assessment. And the next slide will go over a pre-assessment psychology certificate that is called the OCAP and is required for many police services in Ontario. The Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police certificate is a pre-screening certificate obtained prior to the application for most police services operating within Ontario. The certificate is a form of an IQ test and is used by recruiters to determine cognitive skill and ability of candidates. Please click the video to learn more about the test itself.
Hello, and welcome to the new OACP certificate testing process. This is your first step in becoming a police officer within the province of Ontario. Now, before we get started, you may be asking yourself, what is the OACP? Well, the OACP, otherwise known as the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, is a not-for-profit organization that is a channel for police leaders to share ideas and cooperatively create solutions to meet the challenges that face police leaders around Ontario. The OACP is also known for its impact and its advocacy within supporting police services on public awareness about cyber and hate crimes, use of force, PTSD, and many other great ongoing projects. The OACP has partnered with TNT Justice Consultants to help develop the pre-screening process you see today. TNT Justice Consultants is a group of police and diversity subject matter experts that specialize in police training, investigations, and professional consulting. Now, let's talk about the OACP certificate process. The new OACP certificate is a three-step process which is required to be completed in order to receive your certificate of completion. Once you receive your certificate of completion in hand, you can start your application. Great. This process is broken into three major sections: Part A, Part B, and Part C. The Part A is the administration portion where documents are required to be submitted. Once you submit the necessary documents, you can move on to the next stage. Part B and Part C are the examination portions. These are two exams that are done online in a proctored environment and are completed according to your schedule. Once all three steps have been completed, you can expect to receive your OACP certificate shortly thereafter. The system operates 24/7, and we also have a customer service team you can contact for questions, concerns, and advice. Please be sure to go through our website and review our other videos for additional tips to help you through the process. Thank you, and we wish you the best of luck.
Cognitive IQ tests generally have four common sub-testing categories. This includes verbal reasoning, spatial reasoning, abstract reasoning, and quantitative reasoning. These tests are used to pre-screen risk factors amongst candidates to ensure new constables are able to withstand the psychological stressors of a policing occupation. Testing cognitive IQ test performance indicators. Researchers seem to find controversy over what cognitive IQ tests actually aim to measure. IQ scores as indicators of socio-cognitive effect factors rather than assessing the intelligence of a person. Cognitive IQ tests aim to provide recruiters with an understanding of how individuals will act and respond in a given environment and situation.
Next slide, we have the goal of the selection process. So the hiring process is the most important function of any law enforcement agency because the quality of the individuals hired will be what determines the quality of the organization. So the goal of the selection process is to identify candidates who have the attributes required for the success of the job. And in doing so, the goal is to have the selection process that is free of bias, free of discrimination, and merit-based in order to give every applicant an equal opportunity.
Police work has been described as an extremely stressful occupation. Officers often experience many stress-related problems within their work. These many stressors have been separated into 4 different categories. There are organizational stressors, occupational stressors, criminal justice-related stressors, and public and media-related stressors. Of these 4 categories, organizational and occupational stressors are considered more substantial than the other 2. Organizational stressors are stressors in policing relating to organizational issues. They have been described as one of the greatest sources of stress among police officers. Many of these officers recognize the stressors as oppressive, unnecessary, unavoidable, and uncontrollable. Factors within the organization in which can cause distress are the lack of support, mainly from superiors, a heavy workload, inadequate resources, time pressure to get everything done, overly bureaucratic organizational systems, punitive of staff and strictly managed, shift work, excessive paperwork, and a lack of input into policy and decision-making, which is a daily activity. Occupational stressors are stressors in policing relating to the job itself. Police work has been described as inherently stressful. There is no question that policing is at times traumatic and stressful for officers. This type of occupation involves various tasks that are potentially harmful and life-threatening. Some examples of occupational stressors are shootings, especially officer-involved shootings, encountering victims of violent crime and fatalities, and it was noted that especially seeing children victims is stressful, encountering violent and unpredictable situations, constant exposure to pain and suffering, threats to officer safety and well-being. They have to control their emotions when provoked, responsibility of possessing a firearm, and the responsibility of protecting the lives of citizens. Having to deal with the judicial system itself has also been identified as a source of stress in policing. Officers report that court proceedings and dealings with judicial system personnel, such as prosecutors and defense lawyers, are events in which cause stress. When officers have to take the stand in a legal proceeding, this can cause further stress. Furthermore, some officers may feel as though the judicial system is too lenient on defendants that they have followed from the beginning. Officers may experience feelings of helplessness as all of their work in capturing suspects and gathering evidence of crimes can be wasted when plea bargains are offered, or in situations when suspects are released from custody on technicalities. The media also makes it easier for the public to scrutinize police work. Many police departments are therefore subjected to being publicly humiliated by the media, which can therefore cause further stress. Potentially distorted reports introduced through the media regarding incidents of police disappointments damages their public reputation and also causes stress. These criticisms, videos, and reports through the media causes police organizations to have a bad reputation, which subsequently affects the morale of the organization. Having to deal with the public directly can also cause stress in many situations. An example of this could be with dealing with parents and families of victims of crime. Here's a real-life example of Philadelphia officers who describe the critical stress that they face every day.
You're about to get a look through law enforcement's eyes. The danger.
Shots fired, shots fired.
The tragedy.
My baby in the car too.
And the emotional consequences.
That is a life-changing experience.
An NBC 10 investigation is looking at the alarming consequences of being a cop.
For months, NBC-owned television stations worked with the Fraternal Order of Police, surveying thousands of officers about their mental health. Investigative reporter Mitch Blocker has the results.
These guys might be armed, or at least have guns in our houses.
Philly Police Sergeant Andrew Callahan is getting ready to serve a warrant.
If somebody gets hurt, put them in the car in the front.
It's work that almost cost him his life.
They call it a near-death experience.
25 years later, he can't forget firing his gun to defend himself.
A lot of cops walk around, and I was one of them, saying, but it's not going to happen to me.
He says he won't forget his reaction. Sleepless nights and a depression, he says, led to a post-traumatic stress diagnosis.
All of a sudden, I started to have problems, and I didn't know what it was. I just literally thought I was cracking up.
He's not alone. Critical stress is part of police work. In Philly, cops aren't only policing, they're taking crime victims to the hospital and burying friends and colleagues all too often.
I knew then it was time for me to step down because I just couldn't bury another police officer.
Philadelphia's former police commissioner, Charles Ramsey, retired when a fifth officer in 9 months died under his command.
When you lose that many people in that short a period of time, you get the sense of it's just not safe out there. You know, your life is constantly at risk.
Responding to trauma creates trauma. That's according to nearly 8,000 police from all over the country, nearly 500 of them from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. 78% told us they've experienced critical stress on the job. 68% say that stress led to unresolved emotional issues. 16% told us they thought of suicide.
They take that same baggage home that I take home, and I'm not doing their job 24/7.
Jason Dawkins grew up in the North Philly neighborhood he now represents. The state representative walked us through his district. In the last 6 months, home to 7 homicides, 22 rapes, and 138 aggravated assaults.
I want to make sure that there's some safeguards that's been in place for our community and for our officers.
So he's introducing a bill requiring all Pennsylvania law enforcement to get a mental health screening every 2 years. But right now, it does not include money for treatment.
How do you do it without money?
So I think there's nothing that can really happen without money these days when we're talking about the legislature. I think things that are important, we find money for, and I think our officers are worth the investment.
Okay, thanks. Let me know if he goes back in the house with it.
You'll get no argument from this veteran cop. His experience inspired him to go back to school. He's now a certified employee assistance professional and counsels hundreds of police officers every year.
No cop should ever have to walk alone again.
Now, one of the hardest parts of this reporting was getting police officers to talk about their mental health. 90% of the officers surveyed told us that there's a stigma that prevents them from talking about mental health. Statistically speaking, there is a real need for treatment. Last year across the United States, 140 police officers committed suicide. Live in the newsroom for the investigators, I'm Mitch Blocker, NBC 10 News.
As we dive into consequences of stressors, we notice that there are some physical health problems, such as sleep problems. Results of the cited study below indicate that there's a bidirectional relationship between sleep and stress. There's evidence to prove that a lot of police officers who are exposed to stressful situations and chronic occupational stress have increased levels of sleep problems. And this is due to the evening work schedules as well as the abnormal work hours that they are exposed to. Their ability to cope with stress and lack of sleep directly correlates to a couple of things, but to name a few, we can see that there's insufficient rest between shifts, and there's lack of control over their own work time, so their own work schedules. There is a psychosocial burden that comes with taking calls and receiving calls and being able to attend calls and then coming back from calls, having that burden of what they did and how they did it does take a toll. And night work and shift work both increase the level of stress and the lack of sleep. We can also see that there are findings that indicate that low sleep quantity and quality are powerful predictors of things such as obesity, hypertensions, they do involve a higher risk of developing diabetes, cancer, and cognitive impairment as well. And to name some psychological impacts of police stressors, there are stressors such as PTSD, which we all know comes from working in the police force, and other areas of discipline as well. And this brings about a very probable risk of developing mental health issues through heavy alcohol use and illicit drug use. A lot of stress comes into play, and sleep deprivation and disorders come into play as well due to occupational stressors that they are impacted by through increased development of their continuous activation of the stress response system, which is also the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis and the autonomic nervous system when responding to calls and things such of that sort. As well as anxiety and depression, we can see are some psychological impacts of stress. For personal problems, there are many personal problems that come along with being a police officer, being exposed to stressful situations. There are family-based conflict, time-based conflict, and strain-based conflict. So circling back to family-based conflict, having to fight with your spouse or having sick children at home plays into the part of having conflict at home, but also conflict at work because you're bringing that home life to work and vice versa. Time-based conflict, so the time demand that it takes to be a police officer and trying to maintain a schedule that often can disrupt with their home life. Strain-based conflict is when conflicts and problems and as well as tension from their work start to take away from the quality of their home life, which can end up in fights with friends and family. And as well as behavior-based conflict, which occurs when the work and home life are not harmonious, which results in problems. So quote, for example, officers are trained to be suspicious, questioning, detached, and aggressive at times, while family roles require being supportive, caring, nurturing, trustful, and open. If roles spill over between domains and conflict and problems can result, end quote. So time-based and has a negative impact, which is seen from the study cited below, which places so much more importance on the job itself, which results in spending more time at work, more time in the job force, and this results in less time at home. And family-based conflict has a positive result, while home problems spilling over to work, into the work environment. Police officers have a hard time focusing on work. In job performance issues, we can see that there's role conflict. So the job directions or expectations are inconsistent with one another, which usually results in a decrease in job involvement and overall satisfaction within the officer himself or herself. And there's role ambiguity, so lack of clear expectations and concern over their job and how to perform their specific job duties. This can lead to stress and make it difficult for them to complete their job successfully. There's also role underload, when an officer is given too little work or to do, or mental stimulation, which can result in boredom and lack of stimulation, obviously. And there's role overload, which happens when there's too much work to do and the time period given is not sufficient in order to complete that work, which can lead lead to an officer feeling frazzled, overwhelmed, and also which can overall end up in mental fatigue, frustration, and psychological distress. And lastly, perceived dangerous of the job. So feeling that they are at risk constantly when they're at work due to the demanding job that they are involved in. And lastly, we have a preventative measure that is used in North Bay. So North Bay just released, they actually just closed the application process, but they were hiring for a wellness navigator in the police force, the North Bay Police Service. And as you can see below, these are the requirements in order to complete, to apply for the job and what they are expecting for the job. The application process is now closed, but prior to completing this presentation, I did find that they were hiring for this role, and this is a fairly recent role, in order to kind of combat the stress and PTSD and the mental fatigue and all sorts of things that we have just talked about in this presentation, in order to combat that and to kind of divert in order to kind of collaborate and kind of create this wellness aspect in the North Bay Police Service. And that is our presentation.